Good evening, dear listeners. Find your softest pillow, tug the blankets close, and let your eyes grow heavy. I never meant to trespass into another woman's life, but perhaps you know the kind of pull that will not let you go. Tonight, follow me softly into a story of stolen time, gentle longing, and small brave choices. It began with a storm, a forgotten mirror, and a single breath that set me drifting into Charlotte Ashby's place. Every whispered rule pressed at me. Be graceful, be silent, be flawless. I was none of those things. And yet one mistake led to the moment I found it waiting, quiet under the dust. It was the mirror that held me, though I hadn't looked for it. Tucked beneath crates and the hush of the basement air, its gilt edge glimmered like a secret left on purpose. The museum above shook with the storm, but here the silence pressed close, thick with stone and shadow. I reached into the crate, expecting only dust, and my hand found a frame cold and sharp against my skin. Its vines curled in frozen loops, each leaf fine beneath the grey film of years. I lifted it toward the bulb's weak glow, telling myself it was no more than discarded glass. But the quiet deceived me. First came a faint hiss, then a ripple that slid across the surface as if some hidden breath stirred beneath it. I gripped harder, steadying my fingers as the metal bit. My reflection faltered. It didn't vanish. It shifted, blurred at the edges like water deciding whether to hold or release an image. That unease you feel when you see a door left ajar in an empty hall, that was the sensation. Ordinary glass, yes, but open. More than open. The air thickened. My hair rose. I raised my other hand, and before I touched the pane, the shimmer answered. For a heartbeat I glimpsed someone inside, eyes meeting mine from the other side. Not illusion, not light, a presence. Then the storm's thunder fell away. In its place swelled the sound of 100 violins. Silk crushed against my skin where canvas and wool had been. I choked, pulling at a collar that closed too tightly at my throat. The musk of stone gave way to beeswax candles, faint roses drifting above. I staggered forward. My feet struck marble, not cement. Around me voices lifted. Laughter, greetings, music spilling into every corner of a grand Mayfair hall. Light spiraled across glass panels, dazzling and strange. I lifted my hands to my face. Smooth, unfamiliar, cheekbones gentler, hair coaxed into curls I knew I hadn't set. Knees weak, I turned to the mirrored walls. No mistake, the woman gazing back was not me. Someone spoke, a voice close, practiced. Charlotte Ashby. The words landed like a claim, as though naming me could settle me into this borrowed skin. My heart recoiled. Charlotte. The name clung even as others echoed it, their tones certain, their eyes expectant. Shock pressed deeper than the gown's stiff seams. To hear my name replaced aloud made the truth undeniable. The mirror had not only moved me through time, it had stolen who I was. The press of the season surrounded me. Men and women turned with measured glances, the judgment woven into every pause of breath. Their gazes scoured me without knowing they saw a stranger beneath. The storm was gone, yet the weight of expectation struck harder than thunder. I swayed, gown brushing the floor in a whisper that urged me to walk, to smile, to belong. My old life was behind me, walled off by glass I could no longer see. This world stretched ahead, demanding I stand as Charlotte Ashby, whoever she was, and whatever her place meant in this glittering crowd. I steadied the breath in my chest. My own name muttered in silence, nearly lost. Yet their voices carried the new one, shaping me with every syllable, binding me tighter to it. And so I faced the hall, stunned and uncertain, already sensing that this role would hold more than fabric and borrowed skin. Someone was watching me, eyes intent, waiting. The truth of who I was lingered like a secret under my tongue. But now another story pressed forward, and I would have to live it, whether I wished to or not. Imagine waking inside a body already arranged by other people's expectations, every gesture watched, every word measured before it left your lips. That was my first breath in Charlotte Ashby's skin, an unfamiliar weight of silk, the glow of chandeliers, voices netted together in careful harmony. I touched cold stones to steady myself, but there was no place to lean that did not also carry scrutiny. To this glittering world, I was Charlotte, and Lyra was already invisible. The gown pressed harder than the stairs. Whalebone ribs bound my lungs, satin sleeves confined every movement. Candlelight shimmered along beads sewn into silk, tiny sparks of light whenever I shifted. Even standing still betrayed me. The fabric whispered my nerves with each tremor of my knees. The perfume of violets drifted from the woman beside me, her gaze fixed on me as though I were a passage she must guard. Later I would know her role, the chaperone, keeper of propriety. In Regency society, her presence mattered, because a young woman's reputation, resting on her virtue and her manners, could secure or dissolve her entire family's future. When the first gentleman greeted me, my throat tightened dry. I nearly answered with the easy rhythm I carried from my own century. Good to meet you. But the cadence rang wrong in my mind. Too brisk, too modern, nowhere near the delicate restraints expected in this room. I swallowed it back, words tumbling instead into a strange half-tone that belonged neither to me nor Charlotte. Suspicion flickered in the edges of nearby glances. My most vivid failure arrived with a bow. The man inclined himself politely, and instinct, honed in a simpler world, lifted my hand too soon, open and unguarded. In my own life, that gesture signaled warmth. Here, it was too casual, too forward. The ripple of recognition, arched brows, faint murmurs, spread like a current through silk and lace. Charlotte Ashby, careless. The flush in my cheeks was instant, fierce. But instinct also rescued me. I lowered my eyes, drew my hand back with a small laugh, the sound soft enough to blur the mistake into girlish nerves. Then, recalling the cadence of a woman speaking nearby, I repeated one of her phrases almost verbatim. "Such a pleasure, sir." The words slipped out smoother than mine had been, and the murmur hushed. For the first time, a nod met me instead of a frown. A tiny win, but enough to steady me. The rules here were exacting, but they revealed themselves if I listened closely. The season, the sharp, glittering world of the town, where rules spin like fans, was not just about gowns and dances, but about survival. A single slip could stain not only Charlotte's standing, but her family's. I felt their anxiety shadowing me. The Ashbys on the fringes of every conversation, smiles taut, presence fragile. They needed their daughter, now me, to uphold the fragile glass of their reputation. I began to watch carefully. Each tilt of head, each measured cadence, became my hidden syllabus. I could not become graceful overnight, but I could echo. Modesty was safety, silence was shield. The lesson pressed deeper than silk. Here, one wrong word could ripple more loudly than thunder. Still, unease traveled the air. Even the confident ones offered laughter that rang just a touch too rehearsed. The men spoke like merchants laying coins in careful stacks. The women appraised gowns as though they measured futures in fabric. The Ashbys themselves hovered delicately at the edge, fragile smiles stretched thin. Beneath their composure, I sensed a family balancing on unsteady ground, desperate for Charlotte's place among these glittering eyes to bring them stability. I told myself silently I would play along, if only to protect them. Not with elegance, not at first, but with watchful learning. To survive, I would mask confusion and lean on the borrowed cadence of others until I found my own foothold. Each whisper of fabric, each tilt of voice, carried its lesson. Lifting my chin felt more like armor than pride. The borrowed curls skimmed my jaw, the bodice still pressed my lungs, but behind it was purpose. If play acting could shield me, then performance would become habit, and habit, survival. That promise rooted itself beneath my ribs. I would endure long enough to understand the reason I had been drawn here. Yet in the moment I steadied myself. Light moved across the hall. Candles drew attention toward a single figure apart from the chatter. His gaze caught mine. Not idle, not passing, but unwavering. Dark, unflinching, as though he saw past the gown, the rehearsed lines, the very disguise I struggled to hold. My pulse thinned. Around me, music swelled, dances wheeled, conversation rolled onward, but the quiet between us was heavier than all of it. I realized then, not all eyes in this room carried equal danger. Some judged with whispers, but others could unmask with a glance. And I had just met one such gaze. Sometimes, the most astonishing figure is not the one who commands the floor, but the one who waits quietly at its edge. That was how I first saw him. Apart from the dances and the orchestrated grace, a shape still and steady while laughter drifted past like smoke. People avoided his direction, yet I could not. There was a stillness to him, and within that stillness, something sharpened, something that made me hold my breath. He was known already, though no one said his name freely. His reputation lingered in fragments, dropped words, abruptly cut phrases, and sharp pauses that spoke more than speech. Whispers clung to him like a second coat, heavy with meaning. In the town, such whispers were more dangerous than knives. Once reputation frayed, it often could not be sown again. Married women softened their voices when referring to him, guarding themselves as if distance granted safety. Men looked elsewhere, feigning indifference, but their stiffness betrayed unease. To acknowledge him was to risk being caught in his shadow. He was a lord in title, but in truth, the Lord of Whispers. I told myself to turn away. Charlotte's borrowed skin was already thin beneath me, her family's place uncertain, one false step away from collapse. There was no time to bear curiosity, yet my eyes refused caution. His gaze reached across that gilded hall and did not glance aside. Not polished charm, not hunger, simply a recognition that unsettled me, because it was neither mask nor performance. Around his mouth was a quiet that drew me, the kind of silence that interrupts the air rather than fills it, as though he carried an untold truth he would not share aloud. Polite men soon surrounded me with their flawless etiquette, bows in proper rhythm, compliments rehearsed until they no longer belonged to the speaker. I nodded, measured, safe within their predictability. But safety can feel thin. Each time I dared glance back, there he remained, still flame among candles, steady as iron where others bent to be admired. In my chest, something warned, not in fear but in dangerous curiosity. To accept even his notice risked more than awkwardness. With eyes crawling so easily along the edges of that ballroom, the tiniest favor could attach itself to rumor. For Charlotte, and for the Ashbys beside her, such rumor would be ruinous. A young woman's reputation was her fortune, her currency. Once scattered, it did not return. I knew this and still could not pull my gaze away. When he moved at last, it was not with practiced drama. He crossed the hall as if the space between us obeyed him. One dance had ended, another began, and already people shifted, making a path without realizing. He stood before me, unhurried, hand extended. Not elaborate, not coy, just steady. My pulse struck against my ribs. To refuse was unthinkable under so many eyes. To accept was worse, yet my fingers, betraying sense, touched his palm. The world tilted when we began to turn, music lacing our steps. His grasp did not clutch, but the steadiness of it grounded me in a way nothing else in that hall had managed. My feet remembered the pattern, and in their remembering, fear thinned. For the first time since the mirror drew me here, I felt the hush of courage. I forgot to second-guess each motion, forgot the fragile walls that seemed to encircle every breath. I moved, free for a heartbeat, as though the weight of expectation slid off in time with the violins. As we circled, faces blurred, chandeliers fractured into light, and my pulse matched the music. For this moment, I was not stolen, not borrowed, not misplaced. I was simply present. It startled me. That liberation. It carved a space inside that I had not felt since before stepping through the mirror. And, perhaps more frightening, I wanted to keep it. But courage can be costly. With every small turn came the piercing awareness of who watched. Ashby's on one side, gauging if trust was justified. Rivals on another, eager for proof of misstep. Even the patronesses, the women whose approval could open or close doors, glanced from faces to hands, noting every breach of measure. I told myself one waltz could shatter as much as it could spark. Arms wrapped in ribbons and lace itched with heat, but the true ache was in the knowledge that I endangered more than myself. Then came the pause. The musicians let their final note float and dissolve, and I stumbled once, caught by his hand before I tipped. That firm steadied me, yet also unraveled something deeper. I was grateful, but more than gratitude laced between us. Danger, yes, but also a recognition exchanged, one step beyond disguise. When I drew back, my breathing was too sharp, and I wished I could tuck my hands away from the sight of anyone who might mark them trembling. Already I could feel the talk gathering. Who was seen, who lingered, who dared toward ruin. The Lord of Whispers had touched me, and I had let it be seen. That single choice clung. It did not vanish when the music returned for others, nor when polite conversation resumed its practiced flow. Some part of me carried the echo like heat after fire, knowing that even silence around his name would not protect me now. His story was marked by scandal. Mine had barely begun, yet already the two pressed against each other like ink bleeding through paper. And sir, though I smiled in the proper ways and placed my hands where custom required, I felt the air change. Beneath the glitter, beneath Charlotte's mask, beneath all the careful rules, I knew deeper shadows waited. They were not his alone. Others carried him too, and I had stepped straight into their reach. Every house in Regency London wore its secrets like fine lace, delicate, beautiful, and meant to distract from the threads pulling loose beneath. Rumor moved faster than carriages, carrying whispers from parlors to ballrooms before the ink on a letter could even dry. And soon I began to see that Charlotte's family, the Ashbys, balanced on that dangerous edge where silence might break into scandal at any breath. At first, it came in the shadows. A door left ajar behind her brother revealed two men hunched over ledges, their voices strained, coins clinking into a purse as though they weighed nothing. Later, in the study grate, I found the remnants of a half-charred letter, its ink still stubborn enough to show one word: demand. These fragments clung like smoke, proof of debts too carefully hidden to name aloud. I walked past quickly when footsteps drew near, but the knowledge remained. The Ashbys owed more than they could afford. Suddenly each small gesture at a gathering, the practiced smile, the strained bow, no longer seemed like courtly fault, but survival in disguise. The family's future tilted on alliances they could no longer summon with confidence. In this world, dowries and advantageous matches were not ornaments but lifelines. If debts darkened the Ashby's name, no suitor of means would come, and with him, no fortune to secure their place. The very currency of daughters, marriage itself, stood at risk of collapse. The realization struck harder than corseted ribs. My mistakes were not mine alone but weighted onto porcelain already cracked. Every curtsy, every word I offered beneath Charlotte's borrowed name was like carrying fragile china through a crowded room. I was no longer worried about being seen as clumsy or out of place. I feared that a single misstep could topple an entire family's standing. I thought often of Charlotte's mother, her laughter pitched higher whenever neighbors pressed too closely about arrangements for the season. She twisted lace at her wrist, as if the fabric might anchor her nerves. I understood then. Her daughter's presence was meant to display strength they simply did not possess. With a proper marriage secured, debts could vanish behind silk curtains. Without it, ruin lingered at the door. And what of me, trapped in Charlotte's form? If her reputation slipped, if whispers solidified into judgment, would I remain bound within her disgrace? The thought curdled, to be abandoned in scandal, lost in a name that society had already condemned. There could be no mirror wide enough to free me. Even beyond their home, the rules pressed close. Chaperones, vigilant as sentinels, stood at every gathering. Every laugh, every pause in conversation, was observed. A woman's breath seemed monitored as carefully as her gowns, her virtue weighed in each reflected glance. I found no true privacy. Even silence drew speculation. And still, behind all those eyes, the Ashby debts pulsed unseen, ready to surface at the first slip. The danger was not only in coins or scandal, but in how swiftly rumor could unmake a life. In public, the Ashbys glowed with courtesy. Behind closed doors, shadows stretched. And I, wearing Charlotte's face, became unwilling custodian of their secrets. There was no refuge from that burden. The family's fall would become mine. Their disgrace, my prison. I caught myself wondering whether the mirror had chosen this fragile household intentionally. Was I here to steady them until safety returned? Or had I been placed inside a lesson that no matter how carefully performed, collapse gathers its own momentum? Either way, each day forced me deeper into their peril. And yet amid the dread, choice whispered. Small, trembling, but still a choice. I could tread cautiously, shielding the Ashbys, holding whispers at bay long enough to preserve both their survival and my own hope of return. Or I could surrender to the pull of a lone waltz, of eyes that read past disguise, a forbidden path that might entangle me further in peril. One role demanded protection, the other temptation. Still, the sense grew that the mirror itself had not turned silent after that storm. At moments when fear swelled, when the Ashbys' arguments rose behind shut doors, the edges of my reflection blurred, candlelight shifting as though the glass responded. It felt less like chance and more like presence. As though scandal was not only the cage around this family, but the very key to why I had been brought here. I could not ignore it. Behind every conversation glittered an unseen purpose, something waiting just past the surface of glass. And I began to suspect that this was no ordinary entanglement of debts and appearances. No, the mirror seemed to lean closer when secrets deepened, its unseen threads tugging me toward a choice that was no longer about survival alone. What if the mirror was never an accident at all, but a kind of trial, one that shifted with every step of my heart? That thought grew heavier as I lived longer in Charlotte Ashby's satin-bound world. At first I clung to the idea of storm and chance, thunder cracking glass and hurling me here. But soon the pattern betrayed itself. I began to notice how reflection followed choice, as if my borrowed life were no stage at all but a lesson waiting to unfold. The glass no longer seemed neutral. Some nights, standing before the gilt frame, I heard it stir, a faint hum, low as a bee behind glass. And if my heart tipped toward risk, or toward him, the whisper deepened, the pain warming subtly beneath my fingertips. If I shrank from courage, it dulled to silence. In this way it answered me, not as an object, but as something gauging whether I would choose fear or step into longing. That thought frightened me more than the scandal whispered in parlors. The mirror acted like a teacher who never spoke aloud. A single glance, a half step toward desire, and it glowed faintly as though approving. A moment of retreat, and it turned as dim as plain stone. I no longer wondered if I was shaping Charlotte's fate alone. Each turn seemed to fold her thread and mine into one braid, so tightly bound that one tug moved us both. I measured the cost in small ways. At the museum, my life had been routine, filed like catalogues stacked neatly in drawers. Nothing unexpected stirred, and I trusted that safety without question. Here, each gesture altered the air. A smile could hint at promise. A stumble could tip a family toward ruin. It was dizzying to think every choice carried weight, and yet, beneath that weight, I felt a pulse of freedom. The best way I can describe it is this. The mirror felt like a lantern. It showed just the next few steps, nothing more. The floor ahead lay dark, but in that circle of faint glow I learned what mattered most: when to speak, when to bow, when to risk meeting his gaze. I could not see where the path ended, but the straight road was lit just enough to walk. And like any lantern glow, what it revealed was not only the world before me, but the corners of myself I had never dared to look at. And still, there was him. The lord at the edge of the ballroom, the silence in his eyes, the danger wrapped in reputation. Each time I neared him, I felt the hum through the mirror resume, soft as breath, patient as tide. It was impossible to ignore. Forbidden though he was in Charlotte's world, I began to wonder if he stood at the very center of the test, not by accident but intention. Perhaps the mirror had not pulled me into Regency London to keep me safe, but to press me into that question. Would I risk everything for the kind of love that brands rather than whispers? I toyed with denial. Perhaps the hum was a trick of nerves, nothing enchanted. But when I pressed my palm to cool the glass after a conversation with him, the surface warmed as though confirming what I had felt. And when I turned away from him, clutching at duty instead, the silence returned as cold as the museum's stone floors. No, this was not a chance. The mirror asked not for knowledge or skill but for courage, for choice. That recognition left me pacing nights away under candle glow. Some mornings I woke up sure I must escape, certain the first storm was a door still waiting to return me home. Other nights I lingered on the swell of music after a dance, the steadiness of his hand, the hush between us when every other voice grew sharp. I wished I could claim the mirror's judgment was unfair, but in truth I saw what it reflected. Not Charlotte's duty, nor her family's dread, but the truth of my inner self, uncovered at last. It was not lost on me, the comfort of the life I had left, the quiet aisles, the sameness of dawns, the small peace of being unseen. Those memories called softly, like a blanket laid over shivering shoulders. But another voice urged louder now, carried in the hush of his glance and the mirror's faint song when I dared lean toward it. The life I had known was safety. This was a risk, and standing between him, the lantern glow of the mirror reminded me I would walk whichever step I chose. The glass had become less a doorway than a question. Its hum asked, "Do you tremble back into safety?" Its warmth asked, "Do you step forward into change?" I saw, at last, the choice was not about time, or family, or even reputation. It was about me, who I was willing to be. As dawn came and the music of the night dwindled, I kept my fingers on the frame, trembling not from fear but from knowledge. It would not decide for me. It would only answer what my heart embraced. And that left me with one truth I had avoided until now. I held the decision. Quiet as it was, it belonged to me. I stood long before that glowing glass, the lantern light shifting across two selves. Lyra, who clung to safety, and Lyra who risked her heart. Between them, I found a steadiness. Not certainty, but the courage to choose. And soon, the world itself would demand it. The season's final gathering waited, candles set to burn, all eyes fixed upon the path I would reveal with the next step. The choice I feared pressed closer, so near I could feel it settle in my chest like a weight. The season's last ball arrived as if the city itself held its breath. Love or escape? That was the question standing in front of me now. Around me stretched Mayfair's grandest hall, polished floors glowing under arcs of candlelight, every detail sharpened by anticipation. This final gathering carried more than beauty. It carried verdicts. Here, a debutante's marriage prospects, and her family's future, rose or fell. To the crowd, I was Charlotte Ashby, satin draped and fan poised, a piece in her family's wager for survival. To myself, I was Lyra Elderwood, still an intruder and dreamer, caught between the mirror's calling glow and the man whose gaze promised ruin. The air pressed close, not only from the watchers circling like moths, but from the truth that this single night would demand something no rehearsed curtsy could disguise. He found me, as he always did, without pretense. No empty flourishes, no well-rehearsed charm, only the stillness that drew me since the first glance. He stepped near until the orchestra sounded a shade quieter, as if even the violins deferred. His voice slid like breath across silence, carrying not greeting but promise, a dangerous one. A vow with no place in this glittering display, meant only for me to hear. Whispers crowded before I could reply. Silk skirts hissed, eyes narrowed, and I felt the room pause in readiness to strike. The Ashby's fragile hope wrapped around my ribs tighter than the stays beneath this gown. To lean toward him risked not only myself but Charlotte's siblings, her mother, her very home. To draw back left me hollow, stripped of the one presence that had unraveled my fear and taught me desire. Both choices cost more than I could pay. The dilemma hardened into a single beat, as simple and cutting as glass. Return to the safety of my life, or risk staying and being judged for love. No phrases around it, no excuses to soften the edges. One path gave me back obscurity, aisles lined with quiet books. The other was peril, ruin draped in longing, a step into fire I was warned never to touch. Beyond the windows, thunder coiled, the same storm that once shattered glass and pulled me into Charlotte's world. Upstairs, In the chamber marked by dust and gilded vines, the mirror stirred again. I felt its quiet glow even across the house, as though it leaned open, waiting. One door gleamed with safety. Across the crowded floor, the Lord's eyes fixed on mine. Risk worn like a cloak, daring me to shed fear. The contrast cut clear. The mirror's glow escaped. His gaze was fire. Both called with equal strength. I thought of the life behind me. The curator's hands turned dusty pages, adjusting frames in galleries where no one looked twice. A small existence, secure, predictable, gentle. And I thought of what this world had carved out of me. A woman who learned to stand with a steady voice in borrowed satin, no longer shrinking from mistake. The quiet one had shifted into someone braver than she expected to be. Dances moved like tides around me, but I stood still, hearing only the two calls. Safety hummed from the mirror, a soft refuge urging me back to silence. Desire burned before me, forbidden but alive, reminding me that to love without permission was its own act of courage. The choice was not about geography or century. It was about who I was willing to be, unseen and safe, or seen and judged for what I dared to want. The chandeliers blurred in my vision. The scent of roses from other gowns clung to the air. I drew my shoulders tall, satin pressing but no longer crushing, and lifted my chin to meet the world. For once, I did not feel only Charlotte's mask, nor my own hiding. I felt something sharper, truer, waiting to be named. The Lord extended his hand, steady, unornamented. No fanfare, only risk shaped into an invitation. Upstairs the mirror pulsed, a quiet glow like breath waiting to be released. Two choices, two symbols. Safety behind glass, desire before me in flesh. Both patient, both promising to close if I delayed too long. And there I remained, not swallowed by fear this time, but breathing fully into the suspense of it. Love or escape? Both shimmered, both possible. Neither answer diminished what I had won already, the voice to choose. I will not tell you which path I lean toward, not yet. The silence of that moment belongs to the heart, a pause that holds its own power. So breathe with me here, while the music folds back into itself and the candles glow steady. What comes next is not the storm, nor the ball, nor even the mirror's hum. It is the answer I found within myself. The mirror did more than bend time. It revealed the quiet strength I had doubted in myself, the courage to claim my own voice, and to desire without apology beneath the weight of watchful eyes. What began as escape through glass became a turning, not away from who I was, but toward who I could be. Perhaps that is the true enchantment, not rewriting history, but discovering yourself when set upon a stage unchosen. A lantern lit, showing truths long kept in shadow. In its glow, I learned resilience waits in places we fear most. I think of the British Museum now, its halls hushed, mirrors dulled under dust. Yet I carry what I found, the steadiness of standing in both fear and longing. If this warmth found you, come sit with me again. The museum keeps more doors. Let this moment be your last thought before sleep. The night's adventure may be ending, but another awaits. Sleep well, and come back soon for more stories where love and time entwine.